see, we can learn something from everything. Okay, next presenter up is Rachel. Yay, Rachel.
Can I hold it? Konbanwa. Okay, ukiyo-e. Does anyone recognize this image here? Put your hand up if you've seen this before. This is a very famous example of ukiyo-e, which are Japanese woodblock prints. This was done by a man called Hokusai back in 1830. It's called the Great Wave of Kanagawa. Now, I love ukiyo-e. There was a big exhibition here in Hiroshima earlier this year. And many Western artists have also been very influenced by ukiyo-e. In art, though, we don't call it stealing or copying ideas, we call it appropriation, which is a nice way of saying it. So how did all these Western artists find all this ukiyo-e? Well, back in 1850, when Japan opened up to the Western world, there was a huge craze for anything Japanese, and they called it Japanism, or in French, Japonisme. And people were going crazy for Japanese stuff. So dealers were coming over to Japan, taking everything they could and shipping it back to Europe to fill this craze. This was a painting by Monet of his wife wearing a kimono. Now, the great thing about ukiyo-e is that it's print. So it's very cheap to produce. You can make hundreds of them rather than a painting where there's just one. So people back in Japan were actually wrapping up these precious vases and ceramics and things with ukiyo-e, and then they were going over to Europe. So there were many ukiyo-e around for people to see. Even starving artists like Van Gogh was able to go to art galleries in Paris. His brother had an art gallery, and he could go and look at ukiyo-e. And he started collecting them himself. He actually had over 100 in his collection. So you can see his paintings. He's pretty much copying straight off the original. Beautiful one here by Hiroshige, copied by Van Gogh. And then he added a bit of kanji around the border that he had copied from other ukiyo-e. Now, it wasn't just Europeans that were very fascinated by Japanese art. This was an American artist called James Whistler. This is a painting he did of Battersea Bridge in London, but you can see he was greatly influenced by Hiroshige's ukiyo-e. Copied the composition, the same kind of atmosphere, the gloomy feeling of it. Mary Cassatt was another American artist. She was fascinated by Utamaro, who actually produced a lot of very pornographic ukiyo-e, but he did some very nice domestic ones as well, which she copied. Appropriated. Very Japanese. You can see the flat colour and the pattern. Now this one by Utamaro was actually advertising the sexual services of a courtesan. She's biting her handkerchief with sexual arousal, apparently. But Cassatt copied it, but she changed it to a nice envelope that the young lady is licking. Art Nouveau movement, artists like Toulouse-Lautrec, they were fascinated by Japanese ukiyo-e, especially the flatness, the flat colour, and the very interesting perspective that Japanese artists use. In Western art, if something's further away from the viewer, it becomes smaller. But in Japanese art, they start from the bottom of the picture, and then as things get further away, they go up the plane. And you can see it in a lot of Toulouse-Lautrec's artwork. Here, especially the composition is copying, appropriating ukiyo-e. Now, Hokusai was fascinated by movement, so he did hundreds and hundreds of sketches of animals and people in movement, in motion, And he has these sketchbooks, which are called manhwa, filled with little drawings that he did to try and capture the movement. French artist called Degas was also interested in movement, so he studied Hokusai very carefully, and you can see this little black horse here. He was trying, but it didn't quite get right. The other interesting thing about Degas' painting is that it's chopped. Can you see this horse's head? It's chopped right off, which was very unusual at the time. That was also from ukiyo-e because the Japanese artists only had a particular size of paper they could use. So if they wanted to create a large scene, they had to print it on 2 or 3 pieces of paper. But of course, when they were sent over to Europe, people didn't see the whole thing. They would just see one piece of paper. So they thought that Japanese composition had these things, strange sort of things chopped off, and they copied it in their own artwork. These are 2 paintings by Degas, but a lot of other artists tried the same, chopping things off and having them going right off the picture plane. Now here's Monet again. He loved ukiyo-e. He had a collection of several hundred of them. He loved especially Hiroshima. And he got this bridge copied and built in his garden in Giverny in France, which you can go and see. He then painted the scene hundreds of different times of day, trying to capture the light. And if you go to Naoshima, the art island, they have beautiful, maybe 5, I think, of Monet's garden paintings, which are really worth going, really worth a visit. Now, ideas flow both ways, of course. So the Japanese artists were also being influenced by the Western artists. Around the 1830s, they started making more horizontal composition. They started using Western perspective, and they started to use a synthetic dye called Berlin blue, which you can see there. Now, this is an English expression we have called dwarfs standing on the shoulders of giants. And I really like this idea that across the different centuries and across the different cultures, people have always been influenced by people who have gone before them and taken ideas and made them their own.
Hi, Rachel, ありがとう。ちょっと英語ばっかりですすいません。だいたいバイリンギュアルを目指してるんだけど、日本語で話す人で字幕英語で入れたり、それが逆、いつもそれができるかちょっと限られてるんで。